The millionaire's autistic daughter had never spoken until he caught her singing with the nanny. You're about to witness an incredible story about love, understanding, and the extraordinary ways children with autism can surprise us when we learn to connect with their unique world. If you're ready for this deeply moving journey of discovery and unconditional love, smash that like button, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell icon so you never miss heartwarming stories like this one. Trust me, what you're about to see will touch your heart in ways you never expected. Let's dive into this beautiful story. The rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Blackwood mansion in Beverly Hills as tech mogul Jonathan Blackwood sat in his home office, reviewing quarterly reports. At 41, he had built a software empire worth over $300 million, but no amount of success could prepare him for the challenges of raising his 7-year-old daughter, Emma. Emma had been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder when she was 3, and in the 4 years since, Jonathan had watched her retreat further into her own world. She had never spoken a word, communicated primarily through gestures and occasional hand-squeezing, and seemed most comfortable when left alone with her collection of colored blocks and music boxes. The guilt ate at Jonathan daily. His ex-wife, Catherine, had left when Emma was 4, claiming she couldn't handle the stress of a special needs child. Since then, it had been just Jonathan and Emma, along with a rotating cast of nannies and specialists who promised breakthroughs that never came. "Mr. Blackwood," came a gentle voice from the doorway. Jonathan looked up to see Rosa Martinez, the latest nanny he had hired 3 months ago. At 28, Rosa had a master's degree in special education and came with glowing recommendations from other families. What set her apart was her patience and her genuine affection for Emma, something that had been missing in previous caregivers. "How was today?" Jonathan asked, the same question he posed every evening, hoping against hope for some sign of progress. "She had a good day," Rosa replied with her characteristic warm smile. She organized her blocks by color and size, which shows excellent cognitive processing, and she listened to her music box for nearly an hour without getting overwhelmed. Jonathan nodded, trying to hide his disappointment. Progress for Emma was measured in tiny increments, a moment of sustained eye contact, a calm reaction to a new food, an afternoon without a meltdown. He loved his daughter fiercely, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was failing her somehow. "Mr. Blackwood," Rosa continued hesitantly, "I wanted to talk to you about something. I've been researching music therapy approaches, and I think Emma might respond well to—" "We've tried music therapy," Jonathan interrupted, perhaps more curtly than he intended. "We've tried speech therapy, occupational therapy, sensory integration therapy. Nothing works. Emma is who she is, and I've accepted that." Rosa's expression remained gentle but determined. "With respect, sir, I don't think acceptance means stopping trying to connect with her. Sometimes children with autism communicate in ways we haven't learned to recognize yet." After Rosa left to prepare Emma's dinner, Jonathan remained in his office, staring at the family photo on his desk. It showed him, Catherine, and 2-year-old Emma at the beach before the diagnosis, before the evaluations, before their world had shifted on its axis. Emma's bright green eyes sparkled with curiosity in the photo, her tiny hand reaching toward the camera as if trying to grab the future. Now, those same green eyes often seemed to look right through him, as if he existed in a parallel universe she couldn't quite access. He had read countless books about autism, consulted with specialists across the country, and spent a fortune on experimental treatments, but nothing had bridged the gap between his world and Emma's. The sound of Emma's footsteps in the hallway pulled him from his thoughts. She had a very specific way of walking, light, rhythmic steps that somehow always seemed to match an internal beat only she could hear. Jonathan often wondered what music played in her mind, what thoughts occupied the silence that surrounded her like a protective bubble. He found Emma in the living room, arranging her colored blocks in complex patterns that looked almost architectural in their precision. She wore her favorite purple dress with soft fabric that wouldn't irritate her sensitive skin, and her dark hair was pulled back in the simple ponytail that Rosa had learned was the only style Emma would tolerate. "Hello, sweetheart," Jonathan said softly, settling onto the floor nearby, but careful not to disrupt her block arrangement. Emma glanced at him briefly, a moment of acknowledgement that had taken years to achieve, before returning to her blocks. Jonathan watched her work, marveling at the intricate patterns she created. Each structure was perfectly symmetrical, with colors arranged in gradients that showed a sophisticated understanding of visual harmony. "She's an artist," Rosa had said once, and Jonathan was beginning to understand what she meant. Emma might not speak, but she communicated through color and pattern and the careful arrangement of objects in space. Dinner was their usual quiet affair. Emma ate methodically, using her fingers to separate foods that couldn't touch on her plate. Jonathan had long ago stopped trying to enforce traditional table manners, focusing instead on making sure she ate enough and that mealtime remained calm. Rosa sat with them, occasionally offering Emma small pieces of fruit cut into precise squares. The only way Emma would accept them. There was something peaceful about Rosa's presence, a calmness that seemed to extend to Emma as well. "I'll get her ready for bed," Rosa offered after dinner, and Jonathan nodded gratefully. Bedtime routines were crucial for Emma and required a specific sequence of activities that couldn't be rushed or altered. An hour later, Jonathan checked on Emma before heading to his own room. She was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, where Rosa had installed a small projector that cast slowly moving stars across the walls. Emma's fingers moved in small patterns against her blanket, and her breathing was even and calm. "Good night, baby girl," he whispered, as he did every night, never expecting a response, but hoping somehow his love could cross the invisible barrier between them. As Jonathan prepared for bed in his master suite down the hall, he reflected on the day's events. Tomorrow would bring another team of specialists, this time researchers from UCLA, who claimed to have new insights into communication techniques for non-verbal autistic children. He had learned to approach these appointments with cautious optimism, knowing that disappointment was more likely than breakthrough. But something Rosa had said nagged at him, the idea that Emma might be communicating in ways he hadn't learned to recognize. He thought about her block patterns, her finger movements, the way she sometimes seemed to respond to music from his sound system, even when she appeared completely absorbed in other activities. Perhaps the problem wasn't that Emma couldn't communicate. Perhaps the problem was that he didn't speak her language. The next morning arrived grey and drizzly, typical for January in Los Angeles. Jonathan worked from home most days now, finding it easier to manage Emma's needs and his business responsibilities from the comfort of familiar surroundings. He was reviewing a contract proposal when he heard something that made him pause. Was that singing? The sound was so unexpected that for a moment he thought it might be coming from outside or from a neighbor's house. But as he listened more carefully, he realized the voice was definitely coming from within his own home. Jonathan quietly stepped out of his office and followed the sound toward Emma's playroom. The singing grew clearer, a sweet melodic voice humming a tune he didn't recognize. But it wasn't Rosa's voice. Rosa had a lovely singing voice, but this was different, lighter, more delicate. As he approached the playroom, he could hear Rosa's voice too, singing softly in Spanish. But there was definitely another voice harmonizing with hers. Jonathan's heart began to race as an impossible thought formed in his mind. Carefully, silently, he moved closer to the playroom door, which was slightly ajar. What he saw made him freeze in complete amazement. Emma was sitting cross-legged on the floor, her collection of blocks arranged in front of her, but she wasn't building. Her head was tilted slightly to one side, her eyes bright and focused on Rosa, who sat nearby with a small guitar in her hands. And Emma was singing. Not words exactly, but melodic vocalizations that perfectly matched the tune Rosa was playing. Her voice was clear and sweet, with an almost ethereal quality that made Jonathan's chest tighten with emotion. Rosa seemed completely unsurprised by Emma's participation, encouraging her with gentle nods and smiles as they created music together. This wasn't a new development. They had clearly been doing this for a while. Jonathan stood transfixed in the doorway, afraid to breathe lest he break the spell. His daughter, who had never spoken a single word in 7 years, was making deliberate, melodious sounds in response to music. She was communicating. The song came to an end, and Emma made a small gesture with her hands, something Jonathan had seen before but never understood. Rosa immediately began playing another tune, and once again Emma joined in with her wordless singing. This time, Jonathan noticed something even more remarkable. Emma's voice wasn't just matching the melody, she was adding her own variations, creating harmonies that were musically sophisticated and beautiful. Tears began streaming down Jonathan's face as the full implications of what he was witnessing began to sink in. Emma wasn't trapped in silence. She had been speaking all along, in a language of music that Rosa had somehow learned to understand and encourage. He wanted to rush in, to embrace his daughter, to tell her how proud he was, but some instinct held him back. This was Emma's safe space, her moment of connection with someone who had learned to meet her in her own world. Instead, he quietly pulled out his phone and began recording, knowing that he would want to remember this moment forever, the moment he discovered that his daughter had found her voice. The morning's revelation changed everything for Jonathan. He spent the rest of the day researching music therapy for autistic children, learning about something called musical communication that he had never encountered in all his previous research. When Rosa finished her shift that afternoon, Jonathan asked her to stay for a few minutes to talk. They sat in his office while Emma played quietly in the living room, seemingly content after her musical morning. "How long has she been singing?" Jonathan asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. Rosa looked surprised, then slightly worried. "You heard us? I saw you, both of you. Rosa, why didn't you tell me?" Rosa was quiet for a long moment, choosing her words carefully. "I wasn't sure you'd understand, Mr. Blackwood. Emma's way of communicating is different from what most people expect. I was afraid that if I made it into a big deal, it might stop happening." "She's been doing this for how long?" "About a month now. It started small, just little humming sounds when I would play guitar during her quiet time. Then gradually she began matching pitches, then melodies. Now we have whole conversations through music." Jonathan leaned forward. "Conversations?" Rosa nodded earnestly. "She tells me things, Mr. Blackwood. Through the rhythms she chooses, the way she modulates her voice, the patterns she creates. Yesterday, she told me about a dream she had by singing a melody that sounded like flying. Last week, she expressed frustration about a change in routine through a series of sharp, staccato notes. The implications were staggering. Emma had been communicating complex thoughts and emotions, but in a language that traditional speech therapists and specialists had never explored. "I want to understand," Jonathan said. "Can you teach me?" Rosa's face lit up with hope. "I think Emma would love that, Mr. Blackwood. She's been trying to include you sometimes. Have you noticed how she hums when you're reading to her?" Jonathan's mind raced back through recent memories. Emma did hum during their bedtime stories, soft little melodies that he had assumed were just self-soothing behaviors. Had she been trying to communicate with him all along? If this incredible moment of discovery is touching your heart like it's touching mine, please show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel for more beautiful stories about the extraordinary ways people connect with each other. And don't forget to ring that notification bell, because love and understanding can surprise us in the most wonderful ways. That evening, Jonathan approached Emma's bedtime routine with new eyes and ears. Instead of simply reading to her, as he had done for years, he paid attention to the small sounds she made, the rhythms of her breathing, the way her fingers moved against her blanket. Rosa had left her guitar in the playroom with Jonathan's permission, suggesting that he might try incorporating music into their evening routine. Jonathan wasn't much of a musician. His talents ran more toward computer code than musical scales, but he was willing to try anything that might help him connect with his daughter. As Emma settled into bed with her favorite stuffed elephant, Jonathan sat in the chair beside her and tentatively strummed a few chords. The sound was clumsy and unpracticed, but Emma's reaction was immediate. Her head turned toward him, her eyes bright with interest. Encouraged, Jonathan began humming a simple melody, "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," the only song he could remember completely. Emma listened intently, and after a few repetitions she began to hum along. The moment their voices joined together was magical. Jonathan felt a connection with his daughter that he hadn't experienced since she was a toddler, before autism had built its invisible walls between them. But Emma didn't stop with simple harmony. As Jonathan continued the familiar melody, she began adding her own variations, little trills and decorative notes that transformed the simple children's song into something hauntingly beautiful. "You're so musical, sweetheart," Jonathan whispered, and though Emma didn't respond with words, she smiled, a rare, genuine smile that lit up her entire face. Over the following weeks, music became the bridge that connected Jonathan's world with Emma's. He bought books about music therapy, hired a piano teacher to refresh his childhood lessons, and learned to listen for the subtle communications embedded in Emma's melodic expressions. What he discovered amazed him. Emma had perfect pitch and could reproduce any melody after hearing it just once. She had an intuitive understanding of harmony that surpassed many trained musicians. Most remarkably, she used music to express emotions and ideas with a sophistication that revealed the complex inner world she had always possessed. Dr. Sarah Chen, a specialist in autism and music therapy, whom Jonathan consulted, was fascinated by Emma's abilities. "This is quite extraordinary, Doctor," Chen explained during their consultation. "Emma appears to have what we call musical savant abilities, combined with a form of musical communication that's more advanced than anything I've seen. She's not just making sounds, she's composing original musical thoughts." "Can this help her develop other forms of communication?" Jonathan asked. "Potentially, yes. Music and language processing share many neural pathways. Children who develop strong musical communication skills sometimes begin to incorporate vocal patterns that eventually evolve into speech. But even if Emma never speaks in traditional ways, what she's doing now is sophisticated communication." Jonathan began to understand that his previous definition of progress had been too narrow. Emma was communicating beautifully, expressively, and with remarkable intelligence. The problem had never been Emma's abilities. It had been his own limited understanding of how communication could manifest. 3 months after that first morning of discovery, Jonathan's home had been transformed. Music filled rooms that had once been marked by careful silence. Emma had her own small keyboard, a collection of simple percussion instruments, and a recording device that captured the musical conversations she had with Rosa, and increasingly with Jonathan himself. Emma's daily routine now included structured music time, but also spontaneous moments when she would burst into song in response to everything from the sound of rain on the windows to the rhythm of the washing machine. Most remarkably, Emma began to show interest in Jonathan's work for the first time. When he played classical music in his office, she would sometimes wander in and add her own musical commentary to the pieces, creating spontaneous duets with Bach and Mozart. One evening, as Jonathan was working late on a particularly challenging software problem, Emma appeared in his office doorway. This was unusual. She typically avoided his workspace, preferring the predictable environment of her own rooms. She stood quietly for a moment, then began humming a complex melody that seemed to reflect the frustration Jonathan was feeling about his coding challenges. The rhythm was agitated, the harmonies unresolved, a perfect musical representation of his mental state. "You understand, don't you, sweetheart?" Jonathan said softly. You know exactly how I'm feeling." Emma's melody shifted, becoming more soothing and resolved. She approached his desk and gently touched his hand, a gesture that would have been unthinkable months earlier. Jonathan realized that his daughter wasn't just communicating her own thoughts and feelings through music. She was responding to his emotions, offering comfort and understanding in the only language that felt natural to her. The transformation in their relationship was profound. Where once Jonathan had felt helpless and disconnected from his daughter, he now found himself having meaningful exchanges with her multiple times throughout each day. They might not be conversations in any traditional sense, but they were real communication between two people who loved each other. Rosa, who had been the catalyst for this breakthrough, was promoted from nanny to Emma's full-time educational coordinator. Together, she and Jonathan developed a learning program that used music as the foundation for all of Emma's educational experiences. Mathematics became rhythm exercises. History was learned through period music. Science concepts were explored through the physics of sound and vibration. Emma thrived in this musical learning environment, demonstrating intelligence and creativity that traditional educational approaches had never accessed. The change in Emma was visible to everyone who knew her. She still didn't speak in words, but her musical communications were so expressive that visitors to their home often felt they were witnessing conversations even when they couldn't understand the language being spoken. Emma's pediatrician, Dr. Martinez, was amazed by her development during routine checkups. "I've never seen such a dramatic positive change in a child's overall well-being," she told Jonathan. "Emma seems more connected, more aware of her environment, more responsive to social cues. Music has clearly opened neural pathways that were previously inaccessible." But perhaps the most meaningful moment came on a quiet Sunday morning, 6 months after Jonathan's first glimpse into Emma's musical world. He was making breakfast when he heard Emma's voice from the living room, but this time it wasn't wordless melody. "Da-da-da-da," she sang, using a rhythm that clearly meant "Daddy." Jonathan dropped his coffee mug, barely noticing as it shattered on the kitchen floor. He rushed to the living room, where Emma sat with her keyboard, repeating the musical phrase that unmistakably referred to him. "Da-da-da-da," she sang again, looking directly at him with those bright green eyes that no longer seemed to look through him. "Yes," Jonathan whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Yes, sweetheart. Daddy. I'm your daddy." Emma smiled and played a melody on her keyboard, a happy, bubbling tune that sounded like laughter set to music. It wasn't speech in any conventional sense, but it was Emma saying his name, acknowledging their relationship, expressing her love in the clearest way she knew how. 1 year after that first magical morning of discovery, the Blackwood home had become a place of joy and connection that Jonathan could never have imagined. Emma, now 8 years old, had developed a musical vocabulary of hundreds of phrases that allowed her to express complex thoughts, emotions, and needs. She had learned to sing the names of everyone in her life. Rosa was represented by a gentle, nurturing melody, Dr. Chen by a precise scientific rhythm, and Jonathan by the rhythmic da-da-da-da that had become his favorite sound in the world. Jonathan had also changed profoundly. The driven businessman who had once measured success in quarterly reports and stock prices now understood that the most important achievements were measured in moments of connection with his daughter. He had restructured his work schedule to be more present for Emma's daily musical conversations. He had learned to play piano well enough to accompany her compositions. Most importantly, he had learned to see autism not as a barrier between him and his daughter, but as a different way of experiencing and expressing the world. Emma's story had also begun to inspire others. Dr. Chen had asked permission to document Emma's musical communication development for research purposes, believing it could help other families understand the potential for nonverbal communication in autism. Jonathan had agreed, hoping that Emma's breakthrough might help other parents learn to hear the voices of their own children, even when those voices spoke in languages that traditional medicine didn't recognize. The research had attracted attention from universities and autism organizations around the world. Families began reaching out, sharing their own stories of children who communicated through art, movement, mathematics, or other non-traditional means. What emerged was a growing understanding that communication was far more diverse and rich than anyone had previously imagined. Children like Emma weren't lacking communication skills. They were pioneering new forms of human expression that the rest of the world was only beginning to understand. On Emma's 9th birthday, Jonathan organized a party that was unlike any typical children's celebration. Instead of traditional games and activities, Emma's party was a musical celebration where she performed original compositions for the small group of family and friends who had learned to appreciate her unique gifts. Rosa accompanied Emma on guitar while she sang a musical story about a butterfly learning to fly. Dr. Chen, who had become not just Emma's therapist but a family friend, provided percussion on a small drum set that Emma had learned to incorporate into her compositions. Jonathan played piano, following Emma's lead as she directed their musical conversation with gesture and melody. Watching his daughter conduct their little ensemble, her face glowing with joy and confidence, Jonathan reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 2 years earlier, he had been a father desperately seeking ways to reach a daughter who seemed unreachable. He had defined success as getting Emma to speak words, to make eye contact, to behave in ways that society considered normal. Now he understood that Emma had been communicating all along. She had been reaching for connection, expressing love, sharing her thoughts and dreams through the most natural language available to her. The breakthrough hadn't been teaching Emma to communicate. It had been learning to understand the communication that was already there. As the birthday celebration wound down and guests began to leave, Emma approached Jonathan with purpose. She sat at her keyboard and played a melody he had never heard before, complex, beautiful, and unmistakably composed just for this moment. The musical phrase repeated several times with subtle variations that made it clear Emma wanted Jonathan to understand something specific. As he listened more carefully, he realized the melody incorporated elements of da, 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 but expanded into something larger and more complete. Rosa, who had become fluent in Emma's musical language, listened intently and then smiled with tears in her eyes. "What is she saying?" Jonathan asked. "She's saying, 'I love you, Daddy,'" Rosa translated. "But more than that, she's saying, 'Thank you for learning to hear me.'" Jonathan knelt beside Emma and gently took her hands. "I love you too, sweetheart. More than all the music in the world." Emma smiled and began to play again, and this time Jonathan recognized the melody. It was "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," the first song they had ever sung together, transformed and embellished into something uniquely Emma's. But now he could hear what he had missed that first night. Emma's version had always contained the message that Rosa had just translated. In her own musical language, Emma had been saying, "I love you," from the very beginning. Jonathan had just needed to learn how to listen. As they played together in the soft glow of Emma's birthday candles, Jonathan understood that the greatest discoveries often came not from trying to change someone else, but from learning to see them clearly for who they already were. Emma had never been broken or lacking. She had simply been speaking a language that was waiting to be understood. And now, in the musical conversations that filled their home with beauty and connection, Jonathan could finally hear not just his daughter's voice, but the profound love that had been there all along. The little girl who had never spoken had taught her father that communication was about so much more than words. Love, after all, was its own language, and Emma had been fluent in it from the very beginning. This beautiful story reminds us that love finds a way to communicate, even when we least expect it. If this touching journey of discovery and connection moved you, please share that feeling by hitting the like button and subscribing to our channel for more heartwarming stories about the extraordinary ways people connect with each other. Don't forget to ring that notification bell, because sometimes the most profound conversations happen without words at all. Remember, every person has their own unique way of expressing love and intelligence. We just need to learn how to listen. Until next time, keep your heart open to the beautiful, unexpected ways that love speaks to us every day.